The cross, it's right at the center of the Christian faith, right? But what if I told you that how we understand it could lead to two totally different gospels? It all comes down to this. Did Jesus die instead of us, like a substitute, or did he die for us in this profound act of unity? We're about to dive into why one source argues that this tiny distinction, well, it changes absolutely everything. So that brings us to the big question. Are all versions of the good news really the same? Well, according to the material we're digging into today, the answer is a hard no. The whole argument hinges on the difference between just two small phrases, instead of versus for, and how they can create completely different ways of looking at faith itself. Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at a warning about other gospels. Then, we'll get into the very common substitution story and see how it stacks up against what's called the unity argument. From there, we'll explore what it really means to be crucified with Christ. And then we'll tie it all together and see why this distinction really, really matters. So the source we're looking at takes us way back to the very beginning of the church, to the Apostle Paul. And what's fascinating is that he was already warning the first Christians that there were different and maybe even misleading versions of the gospel floating around. And this quote from Galatians, wow, it really sets the stage, doesn't it? It just goes to show that this whole debate over what the true gospel is, it's not new. Not at all. The big concern back then was that these gospels cooked up from human ideas were pulling people away from the real deal. Okay, now let's talk about what is probably the most common way people understand the gospel today. It's often called penal substitution, which is just a fancy way of saying Jesus took the penalty for our sins. And the source we're using explains this with a really simple but powerful story. So get this. In this two brothers analogy, you've got a younger brother who commits a terrible crime, a murder. The police show up and the innocent older brother, he puts on the bloody clothes, grabs the weapon, and confesses. Just like that. He's hauled off to prison, and the actual guilty brother, he just slips out the back door, totally free, with zero connection to the punishment. And that right there is a picture of a legal transaction. Jesus is the innocent older brother who takes our place. He gets punished, we get set free. The key thing to see in this model is that we're basically just bystanders. We're completely separated from the act that supposedly saves us. But what if there's another way to look at it? An interpretation that isn't about substitution at all, but about this deep, profound unity. It's not about Jesus taking our place, but about him stepping into our mess, into our condition, all because of love. And this is where you can really see the two views split. The instead of model is all about replacement, but the for us model, that's about participation. It's the huge difference between being a spectator at your own salvation and actually being united with Christ in the middle of it. To paint a clearer picture of this, the source offers a totally different analogy. Imagine a son messes up at school, and his dad gets called into the principal's office. The father stands there and takes the scolding for his son. See, he's not replacing his son. He's standing with him, absorbing the fallout because of their deep, unbreakable bond. So you might be wondering, where does this whole idea of unity even come from? Well, the source argues it's not just some nice story somebody made up. It's actually woven deep into the fabric of the scriptures themselves. And this famous verse from Galatians is held up as a cornerstone of the whole argument. Just listen to the language here. Paul doesn't say, Christ was crucified instead of me. Nope, he says, I have been crucified with Christ. That points to a shared experience, a deep union, not a simple replacement. And this isn't just a one-off thing. This idea is everywhere in the New Testament. The writers use this language of being with Christ over and over again. Believers are made alive with Christ, raised up with Christ, seated with Christ, even buried with him. It's this language of radical identification. And get this, Jesus himself apparently used a similar kind of analogy. Remember the story from the Old Testament? The Israelites are in the desert, getting bitten by these fiery serpents. To be saved, all they had to do was look at a bronze serpent that Moses lifted up on a pole. Well, Jesus basically compares his crucifixion to that. He says he's going to be lifted up to draw people to himself for healing, not to just be some distant substitute. Okay, so at this point you might be thinking, what's the big deal? Why get so worked up about this? Well, here's why it matters. Because according to the source, this isn't just some abstract theological debate. It has massive implications for how we actually live our lives. It really all boils down to the very nature of faith. Think about it. The substitution model gives you a faith that's a legal transaction. A debt is paid, the case is closed, you're off the hook. But the unity model, that gives you a faith that's a relational transformation. You're invited to step into Christ's story, to share in his death and also in his life. Let's go back to that younger brother for a second, the one who just walked away free. How much connection did he feel to his brother's sacrifice? What shared experience did they have? Absolutely zero. And that's the warning here. The instead of gospel can lead to a kind of faith where you feel no real, tangible connection to the cross at all. And this leads us to a really powerful core idea. You can't have one without the other. The argument is that if you want to truly know the power of the resurrection, you first have to be united with Christ in his suffering. The suffering and the glory, the death and the new life, they're presented as two sides of the very same coin. So in the end, we're left with this massive question to chew on. Is faith just a transaction, or is it a transformation? Is it a one-time legal payment that gets you off the hook, or is it a life-altering union that completely changes you from the inside out? And the whole point is that the answer really depends on whether you believe Jesus died instead of you or for you.